Imagine your golden years, a time when you expect peace, quiet, and the comfort of your own home to be absolute. You've worked hard, you've earned your rest, and your property is your sanctuary. But what if that sanctuary slowly begins to feel invaded, not by an overt threat, but by whispers you can't quite place, sounds that defy explanation, making you question your own sanity, only to discover a chilling reality far stranger than you could have ever imagined? This is the story of Alan, a man who found himself caught in a perplexing real-life mystery that turned his serene retirement into an unnerving psychological thriller, ultimately revealing a secret hidden in plain sight. Alan Jenkins was, by all accounts, a man who cherished his routine. A retired mechanic, his hands, though now arthritic, still held the faint scent of grease and a deep appreciation for the quiet hum of machinery. He lived on a sprawling property in a rural-ish area, one of those places with a generous front lawn that stretched like a green carpet to the long, winding driveway. His pride and joy, besides his meticulously kept garden, were the two derelict cars parked near his detached garage, a classic Ford pickup from the 60s and a beat-up old conversion van, both of which served as occasional donors for parts for his various ongoing projects. They were relics, sure, but they were his relics, and they were part of the landscape of his quiet retirement. Life was simple. Mornings began with a strong cup of coffee on his back patio, watching the sunrise. Days were filled with tinkering in the garage, perhaps a visit from his friend, a fellow enthusiast named Ben, or a leisurely drive to the hardware store. Evenings were spent in his favorite armchair in the living room, a good book in hand or the soft murmur of the television for company. It was a comfortable existence, earned after decades of honest work. The first hint that something was amiss was subtle. A soft thud, a metallic clink, a muffled rustle. Alan would be sitting in his living room, lost in the narrative of his book or the gentle hum of the evening news, when an unidentifiable noise would drift in from his front yard. It was never loud enough to be alarming, just present. He'd pause, head cocked, listening. When it didn't repeat, he'd dismiss it. A raccoon, he'd think. Or maybe the wind rattling something loose. Old houses, old cars, they made noises. But the noises persisted. A faint scraping, a soft whisper of movement. Every time, he'd put down his book, walk to the large front window, and peer out into the twilight. Nothing. The long driveway lay empty. The derelict cars sat still and silent in the dimming light. The sprawling lawn stretched out, undisturbed. He'd open the front door, step out onto the porch, scan the property with a seasoned eye. Still nothing. Just the crickets beginning their nightly symphony, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He'd shake his head, attributing it to his imagination, or perhaps the inevitable creep of age. He even started setting out humane traps near the garage, occasionally catching a startled squirrel or a curious possum, which he'd release far from his property. Yet, the subtle sounds from the front yard continued, an irritating, persistent itch he couldn't quite scratch. Then the whispers began. Not just indistinct noises, but the faint, almost imperceptible murmur of human voices. Low, hushed, as if trying to avoid detection. This started one crisp autumn evening. Alan was out on his front porch, enjoying the cool air, when he distinctly heard a soft, slurred whisper, followed by what sounded like a suppressed cough. It seemed to come from the vicinity of the derelict van. He froze, straining his ears. Silence. He crept quietly towards the van, his heart thumping, only to find nothing. The van doors were shut tight, just as he'd left them. The whispers, however, became more frequent over the next few weeks. Short bursts of hushed conversation, fleeting laughter, a low groan. Each time, Alan would investigate, meticulously checking the perimeter of his property, shining his powerful flashlight into every shadow, every bush, every corner. But always, nothing. Just the vast, empty expanse of his yard and the silent, imposing forms of his old vehicles. The lack of any tangible explanation began to erode his confidence, to chip away at his calm demeanor. He started to doubt himself. Was he really hearing voices? Or was the quiet of his retirement, the solitude of his home, starting to play tricks on his mind? Was this how it began, the slow, insidious slide into a less reliable reality? The thought was terrifying. He was a mechanic, a man of logic and concrete facts. This was beyond his comprehension, beyond his ability to fix. The persistence of the sounds and voices, and the growing fear that he was losing his grip on reality, eventually pushed him to call the police. He was reluctant, embarrassed even, but the anxiety was becoming unbearable. The local patrol officers knew Alan a respected, no-nonsense man. They listened patiently to his story, their expressions carefully neutral. They drove out to his property, searched the grounds thoroughly, their flashlights cutting through the night. They checked the van, the truck, the garage, even the shed at the back of the property. They found absolutely nothing. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, no discarded items, no evidence of anyone or anything being there. They came back to his living room, their faces etched with a polite but firm weariness. "Mr. Jenkins," one officer said, a young man named Officer Jerry, who had always been respectful, "we've done a thorough sweep. There's no indication that anyone has been on your property, especially not recently. We understand this is unsettling for you, but we really can't find anything to suggest an intrusion. Perhaps, with the quiet out here, sounds can carry, or maybe it's just the wildlife." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We advise you to perhaps consider installing some motion-activated security cameras, Mr. Jenkins. That way, if there's ever anything truly suspicious, you'll have proof. But we can't keep responding to calls if there's no evidence of a crime." The implication hung in the air. "Mr. Jenkins, you need to stop calling us. You're imagining things." Alan felt a deep flush of humiliation. They thought he was going senile. He could see it in their eyes, in the slight tilt of their heads. The fear that he was losing his mind, that his sharp, logical brain was finally giving way, intensified, twisting his stomach into knots. He thanked them, a polite but strained goodbye, and watched their patrol car disappear down his long driveway, leaving him alone once more with the unsettling silence and the whispers that only he seemed to hear. He did try the cameras. He bought a basic setup, motion-activated, and carefully positioned them to cover the front of his house, the garage, and the derelict vehicles. He checked the footage religiously every morning, every time he heard a whisper or a thud, and every time the playback showed nothing but his own silent property, the occasional scampering of a squirrel, the swaying of tree branches in the wind. The empty recordings only fed his terrifying suspicion that the problem wasn't external, but internal. He began to isolate himself, embarrassed to talk about it with his friend Ben, afraid that anyone else would look at him with pitying eyes, convinced he was deteriorating. His once calm nights were now plagued by restless tossing and turning, his mind hyper-vigilant, straining to catch another whisper, another unexplained sound, desperate for proof, yet terrified of what it might mean for his sanity. The summer arrived, hot and humid, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. One particularly stifling evening, Alan simply couldn't sleep. The heat was oppressive, and his mind was buzzing with the day's unseen, unheard disturbances. He paced his living room for a while, then decided to go to the back patio for a cigarette, hoping the fresh air and the familiar ritual might calm his frayed nerves. He lit up, watching the glow at the tip of the cigarette, the smoke curling into the humid night. The crickets were chirping their usual symphony, the frogs croaking from the pond nearby. It was a peaceful soundscape, one that usually soothed him. Suddenly, slicing through the familiar night sounds, he heard it. Voices, muffled, hushed, but undeniably human, and they were coming from the front of his house. Not a whisper this time, but a distinct low murmur of several people. Alan froze, the cigarette forgotten between his fingers. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't the wind. This was real. His heart gave a sickening lurch, a mix of terror and exhilarating vindication. He wasn't crazy, but who was it? And what were they doing? He slowly, carefully, put his cigarette out in the ashtray, ensuring no lingering glow. He then moved with a stealth he hadn't known he possessed, drawing on decades of quiet observation, of moving through a garage without disturbing a delicate engine. He slipped off his slippers, walking barefoot across the cool tiles of the kitchen through the quiet hallway. Each step was deliberate, silent. He hugged the side of the house, staying in the deepest shadows, using the cover of his dense rose bushes and carefully trimmed hedges to avoid detection. He snaked his way around the side of the house, towards the front, towards the sounds. As he rounded the last corner, peering through the leaves of a large hydrangea bush, he saw them. Or rather, he saw the back of his old conversion van. The side doors, which he always kept tightly shut, were slightly ajar. A faint, almost invisible light emanated from within, and just as he watched, in utter, stunned silence, the doors swung silently closed. He saw a shadow flit away from the van, a movement that suggested someone had just slipped inside, or perhaps just escaped. A cold dread seeped into him, deeper and more profound than any fear he had felt before. They were inside his van. They had been there all along. The noises, the whispers, the footfalls, it was all real. His mind wasn't failing him. A group of people had been using his property, his vehicles, as their own clandestine hideout for months, and now they were locked inside the van, perhaps trapped, or perhaps just waiting. He didn't hesitate. The fear that had paralyzed him for months, the fear of losing his mind, was replaced by a righteous fury. He backed away quietly, making no sound, retreating the way he came. He slipped back into his house through the back door, closed it softly, and went straight to the phone. His hands, though still trembling, gripped the receiver with renewed purpose. "Yes, hello, this is Alan Jenkins again," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I need officers to my property immediately. There are people in my conversion van in the front yard. I just saw them. They're still in there." This time, the police dispatcher heard the calm certainty in his voice, the lack of the desperate, questioning tone that had marked his previous calls. They could also hear the urgency. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars, sirens off, lights dark, approached his property. Alan met them at the end of his long driveway, pointing towards the van, his face grim but resolute. The officers, recognizing the seriousness in his demeanor, approached the van carefully, silently. They moved like shadows, their flashlights off, their hands on their holstered weapons. The van sat there, dark and innocuous, a silent hulk of metal in the night. It looked like any other derelict vehicle, forgotten and unmoving. They drew closer, their steps muffled by the thick grass. And then, as one of the officers reached for the door handle, the back doors of the van suddenly, violently swung open. Chaos erupted. A flurry of figures, perhaps 5 or 6, burst out of the van, scattering in every direction, running low and fast, melting into the shadows of the large front yard, disappearing into the cover of the surrounding trees and the darkness of the country roads. The officers shouted, gave chase, but the element of surprise, combined with the darkness and the vastness of the property, meant that most of them vanished into the night. Only 2 were apprehended after a brief chase, wrestled to the ground in the grass. Once the immediate area was secured and the 2 individuals were cuffed and identified, the officers returned to the van. With flashlights now blazing, they peered inside. The sight that greeted them was a chilling confirmation of Alan's months of unsettling experiences. The van, once a storage space for old tools and forgotten parts, was now a squalid, makeshift den. Empty food wrappers, discarded fast food containers, and old blankets were strewn everywhere. But more disturbingly, scattered on the floor were numerous used hypodermic syringes, dirty cotton swabs, discarded tourniquets, and tiny plastic baggies with residue. The acrid, sickly sweet smell of burnt chemicals hung heavy in the stale air. The police determined, with a grim certainty, that Alan's property had been serving as a clandestine drug den for months. People had been living out of his derelict van, using it as a place to inject drugs, using his yard as their sanctuary, and his quiet evenings as their cover. The whispers he'd heard were their hushed conversations, the rustles, their movements, the missing food, their late-night meals. The police suspected they had likely been accessing other parts of his property too, possibly the garage or shed, when he was away. The relief that washed over Alan was immense, almost physical. He wasn't losing his mind. He wasn't imagining things. His intuition, his instincts, had been right all along. The vindication was profound, a powerful counterpoint to the months of self-doubt and fear. But it was quickly replaced by a sense of deep violation and shock. His quiet, predictable life had been unknowingly entwined with a dangerous, illicit world, all happening just feet away from his unsuspecting living room. The 2 individuals caught were taken into custody, and the van was processed for evidence. The police commended Alan for his persistence, for trusting his gut even when others doubted him. They offered advice on securing his property more thoroughly, and over the next few weeks, Alan worked with a local security company to install a comprehensive system with night vision cameras and motion sensors, ensuring no one would ever sneak onto his property unnoticed again. Alan's story, a terrifying tale of a man who thought he was losing his mind, transformed into a testament to the importance of trusting your instincts, even when the evidence is elusive and others doubt you. It's a powerful reminder that life's grand performance often has hidden stages, and sometimes the greatest mysteries are unfolding right under our noses, in the most unexpected places. And in the quiet solitude of our later years, when the world can sometimes feel too fast, too loud, too disorienting, the ability to trust oneself, to insist on the truth of one's own perceptions, becomes an invaluable compass in the unpredictable chaos of life. What an unsettling and ultimately validating story. Imagine going through months of self-doubt like Alan did, only to discover such a chilling truth. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Alan's experience. Have you ever had a persistent feeling or intuition that something was wrong, only to be dismissed until you finally found proof? Share your own stories of trusting your gut in the comments below. Your insights and experiences enrich our community so much. If Alan's story resonated with you, if it left you thinking about the hidden corners of our world or the importance of trusting our inner voice, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps us understand what kinds of compelling, thought-provoking narratives you want to see more of, especially those that illuminate the unique experiences of seniors and those navigating their golden years. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future explorations into the captivating, sometimes startling, always compelling tapestry of life's grand performance. Before you go, take a moment to explore our other videos right here. We have a wealth of other tales waiting to be discovered, stories that bring to life the beauty, chaos, and mystery of our shared human experience, filled with funny, tragic, heartwarming, and unexpected turns. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary.